Although folks, this week of course saw the release of patch 11.20 Ghosts of Koresh, which is set to be the last major patch of the War Within. But the release date was a little bit eclipsed by an inadvertent leak by the in-game shop of an unfinished draft of the Midnight pre-orders, revealing some key details about the rollout of the hottest feature of Midnight, player housing. More on that in a little bit, but first let's start with some first impressions of the new patch. For US players waiting for the servers to go live, there was a very pleasant surprise when the patch day downtime, which often overruns its 8-hour window, turned out to be unusually short, with the servers opening up in just over 3 hours. First and most folks' agenda is of course the new campaign, which even for people who don't care about the story and questline is still required to access much of the patch. For those who do pay attention, they were greeted with what in my view was one of the best executed campaign storylines to date, with the main cast of characters, Illyria, Locust Walker and Venari, regularly indulging in arguing and point scoring throughout the whole process. This vibe was largely driven by some outstanding voice acting, but also by the in-game cinematics, which offered a feast of little details, like a character getting distracted and walking into a large NPC's leg, and Xalatas sidling out of frame during one argument between Illyria and Locust Walker, only to pop up and whisper over Illyria's shoulder. I suspect that not many people noticed, but there's a distinct positive step change in the quality of these in-game rendered cinematics. I was very pleasantly surprised by just how smoothly animated my own player character was, let alone the facial animations of the main NPCs, something that the game has long struggled with. Of course, nothing is perfect, and the experience was marred by Blizzard marketing team's decision to include the cinematic reveal that Xalatath was going to be on our side in this campaign in their pre-release publicity. In-game, it is very clear that this was intended to be a major surprise, and spoiling it in the way they did is, in my opinion, incredibly disrespectful to both players and the game designers of this experience. The other very unfortunate issue with the campaign is one of Blizzard's main storyline Achilles' heels, and that's pacing. In week 1, we get access to only 3 out of the 5 campaign chapters. This is similar to Undermine, but whereas in Undermine the 3rd chapter ended at a very natural breakpoint and was explained to players very well, in Koresh the week 1 ending was for me very abrupt and jarring, and gave no hint or even any reason to think there was more to come. This was further exacerbated by one of the main expansion features, Ecological Succession, being missing in action, even though Blizzard's publicity did announce it as being part of the week 1 lineup. In fact, Ecological Succession is locked behind chapter 4 of the campaign, something that Blizzard did also manage to mention in their publicity. The combination of that jarring ending to the campaign and Blizzard's apparent confusion over the timing of its own feature releases does make me wonder if the decision to delay Chapter 4 until Week 2 was a late-breaking change. Certainly in the PTR, with Chapter 4 was available, the campaign felt significantly better for having it, and the ending of Chapter 4 feels a lot more like the natural breakpoint for the campaign. Moving on to the max level content, and the lack of ecological succession is leaving a gap that is very much being felt in the open world experience. Phase diving, which allows us to enter an alternate version of Koresh, really doesn't feel any different to the main version of the zone, beyond the inability to ride and our character changing colour. For sure, there are also different NPCs, but overall there's really no change to gameplay, and it doesn't really feel like a fully fleshed out feature. Add in the world quests only resetting twice a week, and at least for this first week, Koresh is reminding me a lot of the Emerald Dream in being a very sparse experience. Hopefully next week's Ecological Succession will add a little bit more meat. Otherwise, we're going to need the follow-up minor patches to do some extremely heavy lifting to keep open world players occupied for the next 4 to 5 months. The final issue has been a more recent weakness of the dev team, and that's the level of bugs at launch. Now, for me personally, there wasn't any major game-breaking issues, but what there was plenty of minor niggles like quests disappearing from the quest log or stopping progression entirely until a relog. Something that happened far too frequently to ignore. Thankfully, the picture of the more traditional endgame is a little bit rosier. In a major change to the traditional pre-season week, we did get access to 6 out of the 8 Mythic Zero dungeons, along with champion gear and the option of fully unlocking delves for some more juicy hero track gear options in the vault, something that I think will be appreciated by many players who otherwise prefer to focus on the big 4 content. That said, with the Mythic Zero dungeons on a weekly lockout and pre-season Mythic Plus keys being unavailable, I am not sure that the dev team have achieved their goal of keeping us busy in this pre-season week. One other pre-season addition was the new world boss. Now, normally world bosses aren't that exciting, but I think a lot of players found this one to be a bit of an exception, as it turned out to be probably the most difficult world boss since Najatar's Omath. Blizzard have now, in a hotfix, announced a reduction in the boss's health and difficulty, so it does seem that this was not intended. But if you do still have the world boss to do this week, I do have a tip. When the boss takes off and moves to a new location, look for some pinkish portals opening up in the ground. Take one of these and you'll enter phase diving, where you can continue to damage the boss at a time that it is otherwise immune to damage from folks in normal space. Overall for me, the week 1 experience has been a bit of a mixed bag, with some major improvements to the in-game storytelling, but at the same time also some pretty major pacing issues. And I do hope that the dev team takes some time out to take a long hard look at how they plan out their delivery for the content at the start of major patches. With less than 2 weeks to go before the main reveal of the Midnight expansion at Gamescom, we've now entered leak season. Leak season mostly consists of various people posting their own speculation, dressed up with a friend of a friend who works in the WoW team told me, but occasionally you also do get the real deal hidden amongst it all. Probably because we already know quite a bit about Midnight, such as its name and the fact we're getting player housing, this leak season has been unusually quiet. But that has not stopped one of the more unfortunate leakers, the official Blizzard shop, which has a somewhat long and ignominious history of leaking pre-order details on public parts of its site before they're announced. When the new patch went live in North America, some players found that the in-game shop was already offering the Midnight pre-order pack. This was pulled from the store very quickly by Blizzard, of course, but not before some images were posted to MMO Champion and independently confirmed by Wowhead and some US-based content creators. With the WoW team's quality control already under a lot of scrutiny from players, the irony that yet another bug has led to Blizzard leaking themselves is not lost in me, and my more cynical side does wonder if this could maybe end up being the wake-up call that the team, and especially its leadership, needs to start improving. Now, before we dive in and discuss what was revealed, it is worth pointing out that these entries are clearly unfinished. They use the War Within's artwork and are flagged with Do Not Translate, so there is a decent likelihood that they contain some placeholder details and are therefore very subject to change. That said, they do include some very eye-catching details. The most standout piece of information was the inclusion of housing early access. Ever since the 2025 roadmap was released, it has been heavily implied that player housing would launch before the end of 2025, even though all of the other publicity has been very clear that it was a Midnight feature. And this, up until now, has left a bit of a question mark over how housing would be released. However, with this leak, it does seem that Blizzard are planning to make it a Midnight pre-order bonus, thankfully being included in all versions, even the base edition. Now, this is not the first time that Blizzard have used early access to an expansion feature to sweeten the deal for pre-orders. Both Legions, Demon Hunters and BFA's allied races had this distinction, so this has ended up being more of a confirmation of something that at least some of us were suspecting than it was a major surprise. That said, I cannot help but feel that this decision might still end up having some undesirable side effects. The WoW dev team have been at pains to build in a social group play element to player housing, including the ability to create private guild and charter neighbourhoods, and this I think is where the sting in the tail could potentially lie. For players planning to join a private neighbourhood, there will be a significant advantage to getting in during early access, as any latecomers will face a noticeably reduced choice of potential housing plots. Of course, for guilds, that can be offset a bit by the ability for larger active guilds to have multiple housing neighbourhood layers. But there is also another major gotcha for guilds. We don't yet know what limitations there will be on who can set up a guild's neighbourhood, but it kinda feels likely to me that it will be limited to officers. And if a guild's GM and officers are not inclined to jump on the early access bandwagon, this could leave many guild members who do want housing facing having to either wait or to make do with a public neighbourhood for now. Now, I guess that guild members could organise a charter neighbourhood to tide themselves over. But if you've ever experienced how easily guild drama can blow up sometimes, you can probably foresee that some GMs and officer teams will take offence or more likely end up feeling threatened if the guildies do create a neighbourhood without waiting for them. Those issues aside though, I do suspect that many of us will appreciate being able to get our homes all set up and ready for the start of the expansion, where there will be plenty more to be doing than spending a few evenings messing about getting one's home in order. In past expansions, I've tended to move my characters to their natural home cities. For example, my Lightforged Draenei main always ends up getting parked in the allied race version of the Vindicar, and it is going to feel a bit like an end of an era when I start parking them at their new home instead. This does though raise one major question for me. Player housing is very much what I would consider a back of the box, or in other words, expansion selling feature for Midnight, and I've always found it a bit curious that we know all about it before the main expansion reveal. So much so that I have been wondering if Blizzard have something else up their sleeves. As to when player housing will release, the roadmap implies that it will be after the release of patch 11.2.7, which is very likely the final patch of the War Within. If Blizzard keeps to their 8-week patch cadence, we'd be looking at 11.2.7 releasing around November the 25th, which, assuming the team would not want to deliver a major feature during the Christmas break period, only really gives them a 3-week post-release window. Patch 11.2.7 is also very likely going to be when Legion Remix launches, and that does make me wonder how the dev team will shoehorn all of this in, especially as it could also be around the time that the Midnight Beta would also be going live. Blizzard does generally not include dates in their expansion reveals, preferring to give those dates a lot closer to the release times, so I don't expect that these questions are going to be answered at Gamescom, though we may still get some hints about how the rest of the year will play out. Personally, I would love an updated roadmap, but I think getting that is a real long shot. Now, player housing wasn't the only little detail that snuck out. The leak also contains a couple of other returning features: guaranteed access to the beta, and 3 days of expansion early access. The War Within's early access offering did turn out to be a bit controversial, at least amongst the more vocal end of the community. I'm personally not a fan of early access, as unless it's actually just a cut down demo or beta, if a game is ready for early access, then it is ready for release. In reality, that means that it's just delayed access for the people who don't want to pay extra. There was a lot of concern last time around about the potential for early access to give players an advantage over the rest of the player base, but I have to admit that for the most part, while there was still a small theoretical advantage to getting leveled up before the delayed access release date, it really didn't have much practical impact, and I guess the team saw enough of an uptake and folks upselling into the Epic Edition to make them feel that the controversy was still worth it. Looking at what was revealed more broadly, and we're also seeing the Traders Tender bundles return, with the base edition getting 500, Heroic 1000 and Epic 2000. The Epic Edition is also going to be getting 30 days of game time, which the other versions are not, and all versions will be getting that enhanced level 80 boost. As is the norm, the higher editions are also getting cosmetic bundles, with the Heroic version getting a mount and transmog set, and the Epic Edition getting 3 mounts, 2 transmog sets and a housing bundle, along with the usual 30 days of game time, with a month's subscription costing nearly $15 in the US, and only a $20 difference between the Heroic and Epic editions. That effectively means you only pay $5 extra to get the Epic edition, and that, in my view, kinda makes the Heroic edition look pretty bad value for money. Or I suspect Blizzard's marketing folk may be hoping to make that Epic Edition look even better value. Normally, I am someone who advocates strongly against paying for pre-orders. It effectively robs us as players of the ability to change our mind in response to reviews from beta or early releases. And it also enables game companies to get away with subpar releases. That said, getting access to player housing does give us something concrete for our money, and I suspect that this is going to be very popular if it goes live as is. Now, as to the question of when the pre-orders will launch, Blizzard have been very inconsistent over the years, most likely for finance, accounting reasons. Big US corporations tend to work on quarterly financial reporting cycles. In Q4 of last year, we saw the Traders Guilded Brutosaur store mount, a $90 behemoth, which no doubt triggered a sizable increase in Blizzard's revenues for Q4 2024. Blizzard's leadership, and thus the WoW team's leadership, will no doubt be feeling some pressure to top that financial performance. And what easier way to do that than with pre-orders? So my personal prediction is that we won't see much mention of the pre-orders at Gamescom, with them eventually going live most likely in early October. Now, another tradition of those pre-orders is that the cosmetic bundles tend to have some loose relationship with the expansion themes themselves. For example, the War Within gave us a Stormroot mount and Earthen style transmogs. With just names and no images, there isn't a lot to go on, but the naming does imply a probably unsurprising light and void theme. But far more interesting is the housing pack, which includes portraits of Illyria, now named the Ranger General, a title that she's never actually held, Turalyon, their son Arathar, and Xalatath. Now, if these items are intended to match the expansion theme, they could well be hinting towards who the major lore characters are going to be in Midnight. And I do think that there are some very interesting choices there. This is something that is likely to be teased at Gamescom though, so we won't have very long to wait before we find out. And that's it for this week's update. I'd be super interested to hear your thoughts about the new patch, and especially how the changes to the pre-season week are working for you. Are you enjoying doing that Mythic Zero World Tour, or do you prefer the downtime of an open world content only pre-season week? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then do let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos, along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. And if you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me on social media for notifications. My links are in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.